All right, so here I'm going to solve a couple of two-step equations with fractions. Now, I'm going to solve the first one a little bit differently than I'm going to solve the second one. So I'm going to show you two different ways you can do this. So first of all here, hopefully you know the basics of an equation. That is, we want to get the variable by itself. So we have to get rid of this plus 2/5, and we have to get rid of this times 3/4. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this plus 2/5. I'm going to do that by subtracting 2/5 from both sides. So, now of course if I take 2/5 and I subtract 2/5, I'm left with 0. So now over here let's do 7/8 minus 2/5. Alright, we have to come up with a common denominator when we're adding and subtracting fractions. So our common denominator will be 40, the least common denominator. So 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 7 is 35. 5 goes into 40 8 times, and 2 times 8 is 16. So I'm left with 35 minus 16, which gives me 19. So I have 19 40ths. So 7/8 minus 2/5 is 19 40ths. All right. Now on the left side here, I have a 3/4 x. Okay, so now, since I have multiplication here, this is x times 3/4, I have to get rid of that times 3/4 by dividing by 3/4. But of course, if I divide both sides by 3/4, I'm essentially multiplying both sides by 4/3. Because remember, when I divide fractions, I'm always dividing by the reciprocal. So if I'm essentially going to multiply both sides by 4/3. All right. Now these will cancel out, and I'm left with an x over here, and I have to then multiply this side by 4/3. Now I can't cross simplify here, but I could go in this way, because 4 goes in itself once, and 4 goes into 40 10 times. All right, so I'm left with 19 times 1 is 19, and 10 times 3 is 30. So x is equal to 19 30ths. Okay. Now, so that's one way we can do it. All right. Now, another way, a way I think I like a little bit better here, is I want to get rid of these fractions, and I can get rid of these fractions by just doing one quick step. That at first might seem like it's a lot, but once you get the hang of it, you'll do it pretty quickly, and it won't be too much. But so essentially, what I want to do is, before I even do this problem, I want to look at the denominators here. I have a 5 and 4 and 10, and I want to think, what's the least common multiple of those numbers? In that case, this could be 20. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply just going to multiply both sides of this equation by 20. So I'm going to take this side over here first, this 1/5 m minus 3/4. I'm just going to take this side over here, and I'm going to multiply it by 20. So 20 times 1/5 m minus 3/4. All right. So now if I do this part, 20 times 1/5. Now again, I'm distributing here. I'm doing 20 times 1/5 m and then 20 times a negative 3/4. So let's do the 20 times 1/5 m. I'm going to do it right here. So 20 over 1 times 1/5. Again, I can cross simplify here. 5 goes into itself once, and 5 goes into 24 times. So I'm left with 4 over 1, or just a 4. So this 1/5 m is just going to become 4m. Okay? Now let's do this 20 times negative 3/4. So 20 over 1 times a negative 3/4. Let's separate the signs there. Now I can cross simplify. 4 goes into itself once, goes into 25 times. If I multiply straight across, I have 5 times negative 3 is negative 15 over 1, which of course equals negative 15. So this minus 3/4 has become negative 15. So I multiplied the left side of the equation by 20. Now if I multiply the right side of the equation by 20, let's do that down here. 17 over 10 times 20 over 1. I can cross simplify with the 10 and the 20. So 10 is 1, and 20 becomes 2. So 2 times 7 is 34. I'm sorry, 2 times 17 is 34 over 1, which of course equals 34. All right, so this equation that was 1/5 m minus 3/4 equals 17/10, I've now just changed it to 4m minus 15 equals 34. Now remember, I can do that simply because, again, you've been told probably with equations that what you do to one side, you have to do the other side. So in theory, you could do anything you want to this equation as long as you do it to both sides. So in this case, I just multiply both sides by 20. All right, so now if I have this equation here, I'm going to rewrite it over here. 4m minus 15 equals 34. Let's get rid of this minus 15 by adding 15. All right, now remember I have to do it to both sides. Negative 15 plus 15 cancels out, gives me 0. 34 plus 15 gives me a 49. So I'm left with 4m equals 49. Now, of course, the last thing I have to do is divide both sides by 4. And if you're doing this part where you're working with fractions and equations, then I'm sure you've done the basics here. You've done these types of equations. But so I'll divide both sides by 4. Of course, 4 divided by 4 is 1, so I'm left with 1m. And then 49 over 4, you can leave that as the answer. 49 over 4. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. Now, of course, you could switch it into a mixed number if you wanted to. 4 goes into 49 12 times, so I can say 12 and 1/4 is another answer, just another form. So these equal one another. So there you go. So if you just go ahead and of course you could solve it the way I did the first one, which is here, just by actually just doing the math with the fractions. But if you're someone that doesn't really like working with fractions, of course, I'd recommend practicing them so you're good with them. But you could also always do it this way. As long as you do the same thing both sides of the equation, you're good to go. Thanks for watching.